The next collapse, why your city was secretly chosen to fail. The notices went up on a Tuesday. Routes cut, permits paused, temporary emergency budgeting. By Friday, the best engineer on the rail line resigned after another 90-minute delay. She didn't slam the door, she booked a one-way ticket after missing her kid's school pickup for the third time in a month. She folded a crayon drawing into her laptop sleeve and walked out without a goodbye party. That week, 3 founders moved their teams to a city they'd barely visited. Nobody shouted. The decision had already been made for them. Get this, your city was financially marked for decline. 3 hidden mechanisms decide winners and losers. The brain drain is already moving. This isn't incompetence, it's a managed transition using policy levers. There's a silent weapon, quiet beneficiaries, and a map. To see it, go back to the first small cuts and hear the clock start. Pillar map, the promise and the road ahead. Here's the map you weren't shown. 3 pillars, 1 outcome. First, the de-prioritization playbook, a repeatable sequence that pulls stability out from under daily life. It starts with starving infrastructure, maintenance deferrals, pilots that never graduate, CapEx shifted to future-proof projects while today's systems fail. Then housing becomes a demographic filter, supply constrained at every turn, appraisal games that reward vacancy, and carve-outs that privilege asset holders over families. Finally, services degrade on schedule, transit slows, school rosters thin, police staffing churns, and the insurance bill doubles. The result isn't random decay. It's friction calibrated to encourage voluntary exit by the people who keep a city humming. Second, the beneficiaries, places engineered as magnets. They remove friction by right permits with service-level agreements, infrastructure funded before growth, schools tied to performance contracts, visas and credentialing aligned to pull STEM workers. Capital follows predictability. Families follow uptime. Companies follow both. Third, the endgame architecture. Controlled corridors that concentrate talent and compliance. Think energy routes that map to fiber backbones that map to payroll capture. Payment rails and tax nexus rules get modernized, which quietly relocates who gets paid when you work from anywhere. Governance shifts from city councils arguing over potholes to standards bodies setting the rules for entire regions. This is where the real power lies. How do we prove any of this? With budgets, mobility data, bond documents, filings, permits, school and transit enrollment. Clean paper trails. You don't need a leak when you have covenants and ratios. One city crossed the point of no return last year. Not because of one scandal, but because the ratios that predict insolvency flipped while everyone argued about the vibe. We'll get there. For now, watch the triad that breaks daily life. Movement, shelter, services. Hit those levers in sequence, and the people you want to keep will leave on their own. That's the promise of the playbook and the road ahead if you don't spot it in time. The de-prioritization playbook. To understand how a city is taught to fail, you start with what people feel from the moment they wake up. Movement, shelter, services, hit those softly at first. Stakes, when your commute becomes a gamble, your job becomes remote by necessity, and then remote by choice. That choice becomes an exit. When schools close a grade and transit misses a connection, parents start calculating. The city's most productive cohort keeps the city solvent. Encourage them to leave and the math breaks. Action infrastructure starvation looks boring in a spreadsheet. Maintenance deferral lines tick up. The maintenance to new build ratio flips. Instead of fixing the signals, you pilot an app that optimizes dwell time. Instead of replacing track, you announce a visionary extension. The backlog grows, covenants in bond deals quietly restrict quick fixes, and uptime slips under the threshold riders tolerate. Meanwhile, procurement cycles lengthen. The good engineers stop fighting the spreadsheet and find a team elsewhere that ships. Impact reliability collapses by inches. Ridership never returns to its pre-2019 baseline. The off-peak headways stretch just enough to make daycare pick up a coin toss. That's not a statistic. It's a daily stress test parents refuse to fail. They resolve the uncertainty the simplest way, by leaving. Meanwhile, housing turns from home to filter. The rules that would allow more homes get delayed at committee, then delayed again because the public notice was insufficient. Zoning bottlenecks choked by right projects. Parking mandates force overbuilt garages that make workforce housing uneconomical. Short-term rental carve-outs slip through, sweetened by revenue projections. Appraisals get managed to comps that reward vacancy as a future cash flow. A luxury pipeline flows, predictable fees, predictable approvals, while missing middle projects die of paperwork. Mechanisms behind the curtain. 1031 exchange rules keep equity trapped in the city's highest margin assets, making vacancy a rational option. Institutional buyers target single-family portfolios where cap rates look safe, pushing would-be owners into rent. Rent burdens cross the 50% line for median earners in the places that used to keep families. Schools notice first. Enrollment declines force consolidations. Consolidations push families to neighboring districts. The feedback loop accelerates. A neighborhood gets sold to a spreadsheet. Tenants don't get a notice from a person, they get a portal login. Impact: families leave earlier than they want to. Founders quietly relocate to places where an office permit takes weeks, not quarters. Teachers with 10 years of institutional memory pack their classrooms into boxes and drive south. You don't just lose workers, you lose cultural memory. The PTA president who knows which bus route has been failing for 8 months and why. Services become the pressure point that seals the decision. Police departments lean on overtime because lateral hires won't come into churn. Courts stack backlogs. Small cases take months, then a year. Insurance renewals arrive with a shock. Premiums up, coverage narrowed, deductibles higher. One storefront takes the hit, then the neighbor can't afford the new rate without cutting night shift. The 24-hour economy that kept streets lively turns into a 12-hour corridor with dead edges. A shop owner stops calling 911 because the response triggers a report that triggers an insurance hike. He hires private security and shortens hours. He doesn't file a complaint, he changes his routine. The budget sequence is the skeleton key. It starts with temporary maintenance deferrals to balance this year's books. Capital shifts to new builds that carry ribbon-cutting photos and federal match money. Service frequency gets trimmed off-peak to save face. Then an emergency appears, a revenue shortfall, a mechanical failure, a storm, just enough to justify emergency debt. That debt comes with covenants. Spend here, don't spend there. Those restrictions outlive the emergency. Next year's budget is already spoken for. Policy fingerprints are subtle. Permit friction rises, an extra traffic study here, a community pause there. The parking minimums stay even as everyone admits they don't fit the block. Pilot programs substitute for permanent fixes, limited hours, limited scope, limited accountability. Meanwhile, procurement rules lock in a vendor who underbids and overchange orders, tying up capital you can't redirect without penalties. The ratio of staff who can say yes shrinks. Every no takes 5 minutes. Every yes takes a committee. Behavioral trigger: you're not told to leave. You're given just enough uncertainty to decide that staying is irresponsible. The decision feels personal. It's actually patterned. One mid-level PM opens a denial email at 11:42 p.m. Additional traffic study required for a by-right addition that would have made a bedroom for a newborn. She stares at the screen and understands she isn't negotiating with a person. She's being sorted by a spreadsheet. Workers with options exit first. They're followed by the small employers who used to field soccer teams and sponsor school plays. The tax base follows them out of town. The countdown starts the moment people stop planning 5 years out. What nobody knew at the time, capital had already shifted. A transit system with falling uptime pays higher borrowing costs. A district with declining enrollment loses the subsidy tailwind. A city with rent-burdened households sees sales tax soften. Ratings agencies flag trends. Index providers adjust inclusion. Large funds rebalance out of your paper, not because anyone hates your city, but because the spreadsheet says risk-adjusted returns look better elsewhere. This is the moment everything changes. The voluntary exits stop being voluntary. Your landlord sells to a fund that won't renew. Your child's school closes a grade. Your commute turns into a roulette wheel. Meanwhile, across a border or 2 states away, a hub is promising permits in 20 days and a school seat guaranteed within walking distance. Families aren't choosing adventure. They're choosing less friction. While that's happening in your city hall, budget meetings shift language. Optimize, rationalize, right-size. The plan is presented as resilience. In practice, it's deprioritization, not forever, just long enough to reshape where talent and capital land. And once movement hurts, housing filters and services wobble, the quietest lever pulls next. People stop planning 5 years out in your city. They plan 5 weeks. That's how a place loses its future without a single headline. Case File B, housing as a demographic filter. Once movement starts to hurt, the next lever makes staying feel financially reckless. Shelter stops being a home and becomes a sorting device. The stakes are simple. Price out families and founders, and schools thin, storefronts lose regulars, and the neighborhood's future goes quiet. Here's what actually happened. Supply that should be routine gets trapped in process. A by right duplex hits a surprise traffic study. A 4-story infill triggers a context review. Hearings stretch months, then a year. Meanwhile, a luxury pipeline glides through with seasoned counsel and predictable fees. Workforce units stall on parking mandates that force 2 spaces per door, turning the pro forma red. The result is a slow bleed. Approvals without starts, starts without completions, completions that don't match who's trying to live there. Mechanisms sit under the paperwork. Appraisers lean on comps shaped by empty, investor-held stock, so vacancy becomes a feature, not a flaw, future upside validated. 1031 exchange rules trap gains in the highest margin assets, keeping capital circling the same neighborhoods and rewarding holdouts who sit empty for a better deal. Institutional buyers sweep single-family homes in bulk, bidding cash, closing in days, absorbing the starter inventory that once moved young families from rent to stability. A spreadsheet can outlast a lease. Impact shows up as ratios, then as exits. Rent burden crosses 50% for the median earner in core districts. School enrollment drifts down, a grade consolidates, then a whole campus goes temporary. Teachers with mortgages an hour away start looking for contracts closer to home. After-school programs lose volunteers. The PTA's email list goes silent. The housing market didn't just move numbers, it moved people who carried community memory. A micro-story makes it plain. On a block of 9 duplexes, 6 owners sold in a 6-week window to an LLC with a number for a name. Tenants got portal logins, new market rates, and renovation notices that functioned like timed exits. The barber who paid on the first every month couldn't float the repositioning period. He closed on a Tuesday, took down the photos, and handed the keys to a courier who didn't make eye contact. 2 months later, the same shop came back staged with greenery and a letterboard price list. The old clients didn't return. They'd already left the neighborhood. Policy fingerprints are easy to miss. Short-term rental carve-outs stay in place, justified by tourist dollars, but they siphon the last flexible units from long-term tenants. Interim controls freeze small builders while big projects advance under separate agreements. Affordability requirements attach without timelines, turning into chips to be traded for height or parking reductions, in court if needed. Permit counters shrink their hours. Service-level agreements remain goals. A clock that matters to households stops mattering to the city. Insurance adds pressure from the side. Older buildings face premium spikes. Small landlords pass the cost or sell. Buyers using leverage can't pencil without rent hikes. Buyers paying cash can. A family who'd scraped together first and last month's rent loses to a fund that promises to stabilize the asset. Stabilize means no kids on the waiting list this year. Meanwhile, map the effects. Neighborhoods near light rail that doesn't run on time see fewer renewals. Blocks with school closures see listings sit, then sell to investors. A corridor with frequent service and a functioning elementary school fills with people who can pay more fast. The filter doesn't ask your politics, it tests your buffer. This is where the feedback loop gets teeth. As family households shrink, elementary schools lose funding. As schools wobble, families who could have stayed 1 more year decide to move now. As they go, small services, daycares, clinics, after-school pickup vans lose revenue and close. That further narrows who can live here. Singles with flexibility, couples without kids, remote workers whose schedules absorb delays. The place changes without a vote. What nobody knew at the time, capital had a compass. Mobility data showed which census tracts bled commuters and which absorbed them. Lenders flagged zip codes where delinquency rose after insurance resets. Rating outlooks leaned negative in districts with enrollment drift. Funds rotated accordingly. It looked like taste. It was math. There's a tell when a city is using housing to filter instead of house. Rules that keep the middle locked out while luxury and novelty glide. If permits take quarters unless the finishes sparkle, if your lease renewals start arriving with renovation fees, if zoning cleans up signage faster than it fixes lot sizes, you're being sorted. The moment you realize it is small and sickening, an auto-reply from a leasing portal says market rate adjustment, while your kid's school announces a consolidation. That's not a coincidence, it's a timer. Families read the room. Founders do too. They move to places where permits are answers, not riddles, where a school seat is a contract, not a lottery, where a landlord's name is a person, not an inbox. They don't call it escape, they call it planning. Case File C, Service Decay and Security Theater. When movement hurts and shelter sorts, services finish the job. The stakes aren't abstract. Confidence collapses, one missed ambulance, one closed clinic, one unanswered call at a time. Businesses hesitate. Parents set a deadline. Once that deadline passes, they act. Here's what actually happened day to day. Police departments leaned on overtime to plug vacancies that never closed. Lateral hires toured, saw churn on the roster, and walked. Court calendars slid from crowded to clogged. Arraignments stretched, small claims lingered, nuisance cases piled up. Permits for sidewalk dining got faster than permits to fix broken streetlights. The little signals stacked. Graffiti removal paused for pilot evaluation. Park bathrooms locked at dusk. The library cut Sunday hours. None of it made a headline. All of it changed the temperature. Insurance saw it before most residents. Premiums jumped for storefronts after 2 claims in 12 months, then again when the carrier revised risk geography. Deductibles rose, coverage narrowed. A grocer along the bus corridor had a break-in, then a slip and fall. Renewal arrived with a number that erased the profit from early mornings. He cut hours. The bodega next door followed. A block that felt alive at 11 p.m. went dark at 9. Fewer eyes on the street meant more petty crime, which brought more claims, which drove more closures. That's a loop, not a mood. Meanwhile, security theater filled the vacuum. Vendors sold dashboard cameras, blue light kiosks, analytics that flagged loitering. Contract guards appeared in polos with reflective vests. Malls posted no-bag policies. Transit installed fare gates that slowed the honest and didn't deter the determined. The visible presence reassured for a week, then faded into background noise because nothing structural changed. Overtime still carried patrol, detectives still cycled out, dispatch time still stretched. The theater looked like action. It functioned like delay. Here's the countdown tell. If you see more kiosks than staff, you're inside the last 24 months before the businesses that anchor your block set quiet exit dates. Mechanically, the city ran on unfunded mandates and vendor lock-in. New state rules required more reporting with no staff to do it. Software licenses auto-renewed, eating a slice of next year's budget before council voted. Body-worn cameras generated terabytes that needed storage the city couldn't negotiate down. Each contract came with implementation support that never quite implemented. Each dollar pushed into compliance was a dollar not spent on the predictable. Lights on, bathrooms open, routes staffed. A micro-story anchors it. On a corner that once served shift workers, a cafe owner stopped calling 911. The first time, officers came 2 hours late and wrote a report. The second time, officers came faster and the insurer flagged the address. The premium jumped. The third time, she didn't call. She hired a private guard for weekends, closed on Mondays, and took the espresso machine home at night. Revenue dipped, payroll shrank, tips vanished, and one of her baristas, who also coached a youth team, moved to a city where storefronts didn't need guards to serve croissants. Schools felt it in parallel. Enrollment dipped, classes combined, electives disappeared. After-school programs lost their coordinator to a neighboring district with stable funding. Parents with flexible jobs pulled kids mid-year. Those without flexibility rode it out until the bus route changed again and the daycare waitlist stretched to spring. The district's operating ratios tripped a threshold. Bond disclosures changed a sentence. That sentence mattered to funds holding the paper. They rotated away. What nobody knew at the time, service decay wasn't just a failure, it was a signal. Rating outlooks referenced staffing churn and court backlogs. Insurers updated risk maps. Mobility data showed weekend foot traffic collapsing earlier each month. Verizet-type feeds flagged the drop before the PTA did. Ping counts thinning after 7 p.m., dwell times shrinking on Fridays, school-hour clusters drifting to a neighboring district. The spreadsheets didn't name names, they color-coded blocks. And when a block turns the wrong color for 2 quarters, institutional orders flip in hours. Your clock starts when theirs does. Language inside City Hall shifted to harm reduction, situational response, community ambassadors. Some of it helped briefly. Much of it absorbed attention. Meanwhile, procurement stuck on a vendor whose cameras captured everything except the fix. Working lights, reliable routes, predictable hours, a cop who stayed 6 months longer than the last one. This was the moment everything changed for businesses on the margin. Insurance plus uncertainty beat optimism. They didn't hold a press conference. They turned the sign to closed at 8:30 and never flipped it back. Across a border or 2 states away, a different script ran. Service SLAs with penalties. School performance contracts with transparency, permitting that measured in days. Insurance priced to risk, not rumor. Families who left weren't chasing trendiness. They were replacing theater with guarantees. The Beneficiaries, hubs pulling talent and capital. While legacy centers bleed predictability, recipients scale it. The criteria aren't mysterious. Low friction, visa magnets, targeted subsidies, STEM funnels, and rules that say yes in writing. Families aren't moving for vibes. They're moving for uptime. Start with Poland. For a decade, Warsaw, Krakow, and Wrocław built a predictable pipeline. STEM-heavy universities feeding finance and tech shared service centers, then product teams. Foreign direct investment led Central and Eastern Europe because budgets put infrastructure first. Airports modernized, rail corridors tightened headways, and data centers tied into a thickening fiber mesh. Employers posted roles with clear relocation support. Schools marketed bilingual tracks. Rent levels matched salaries. A senior engineer who gave up on a delayed train at home now gets to daycare pickup because a 17:08 departure actually leaves at 17:08. Mexico followed a different route, nearshore manufacturing plus IT. When supply chains craved proximity, Monterrey, Guadalajara, and Querétaro offered industrial parks with turnkey permitting and connections to North American logistics spines. The filings told the story. Multinationals citing lower lead times and talent clusters expanding around embedded software, robotics, and QA. Government rolled out fast-track visas for specialized roles and digitized customs to shave hours off crossings. Families arrived to neighborhoods where schools partnered with employers for internships, and cities funded childcare near job centers to keep parents in the workforce. Founders came because a factory shell converted to a lab in weeks, not quarters. Portugal played the lifestyle card with policy teeth. Tech visas, English-forward bureaucracy, by right conversions in certain zones, and a burst of co-located STEM programs with EU funding. Lisbon and Porto didn't promise the cheapest rents. They promised an answer when you applied to build or hire. Digital nomads tested first. Companies followed with satellite teams that hardened into hubs. The selling point was simple. Everything you need is within 20 minutes, and the city meets its own schedules. Look at the common mechanics. By right density in target corridors keeps housing abundant enough that growth doesn't choke itself. Build-to-rent projects come with occupancy rules enforced by audits, so units don't sit dark while families search. Permits run on service-level agreements that trigger automatic approvals or fee refunds if deadlines are missed. Infrastructure is funded up front. Power redundancy, water capacity, last-mile fiber, and transit tie-ins built before the first ribbon cutting. Uptime guarantees sit in contracts, not speeches. Service magnets reinforce the pull. Schools sign performance compacts, public, charter, and voucher-enabled models competing on outcomes, not slogans. Childcare sits within walking distance of major employment nodes, subsidized by blended finance that ties payments to utilization. Talent visas align with local shortages, so a robotics engineer isn't waiting 9 months to start. Cross-border credentialing pilots let a nurse or a teacher move without redoing an entire degree. The message is consistent. We remove frictions you can't negotiate away. Capital doesn't need romance, it needs certainty. Rising hubs court anchor tenants with performance clauses and clawbacks. Miss your hiring numbers, you pay. Hit your uptime, you get a rate step down on utilities. Sovereign funds and pension capital show up when standards are enforceable. Vendor clusters form because procurement signs multi-year frameworks with transparent pricing and exit options if service slips. It's not cheap, it's clear. And it's running on a clock. Hubs publish SLAs with penalties, and each on-time month compounds trust. After 12 straight months, families lock in leases and schools fill seats. Miss that window, and your city becomes the control group. Listen to how they talk about themselves. Safety, speed, affordability, framed as identity, not aspiration. Mayors publish weekly dashboards, permit turnaround times, transit reliability, school seat availability, median rent as a share of income in target districts. Miss a target, explain the fix by Friday. That cadence builds trust faster than a marketing campaign. A micro story stitches it together. A founder who lost 2 clients to late deliveries moved her ops lead to Krakow for 3 months to test. The landlord answered the phone. The city stamped a small lab permit in 9 days. A local university sent 3 interns with machine vision experience. They stayed. 6 months later, the founder wasn't testing anymore. She was hiring, and her best engineer from the failing rail line showed up with a suitcase and a start date. Meanwhile, a bilingual teacher in Mexico City took a job in Querétaro because the school offered a performance bonus tied to reading gains and guaranteed classroom materials on day one. Her spouse found work at a supplier 2 exits down the corridor. Their apartment lease came with a childcare spot downstairs. Commute, 18 minutes predictable. Week 2, they stopped checking the train app. These places aren't random bright spots. They're inversions of the de-prioritization playbook, where declining cities defer maintenance, rising hubs overfund the backbone and publish uptime. Where declining cities weaponize housing scarcity, rising hubs legalize abundance with teeth. Where declining cities substitute theater for service, rising hubs contract for outcomes and penalize misses. Filings, hiring geographies, and vendor clusters give away the pattern. Job posts shift to these corridors months before headlines catch up. Sovereign funds co-invest in roads, rail, ports, and fiber in the same arcs. Schools expand where employers pre-commit to internships. And families, who don't care about policy jargon, notice that buses meet trains, landlords answer emails, teachers stay, and doctors take appointments on time. If you want a number to hold on to, when foot traffic drops 10–15% year-over-year in your district, Verizet-type datasets flag it, rating notes echo it, and index screens move money within a quarter. That's your countdown. If it feels like magnets, that's because they are built like magnets. Remove friction, guarantee movement, protect time. Capital goes where time is respected. Talent goes where time isn't stolen. Playbook inversion, how rising hubs engineer pull. To see how magnets are built, flip every cut you just watched. Rising hubs don't ask you to endure friction, they prepay to remove it. They write guarantees into contracts, not talking points, and they put clocks on every promise that touches your life. Start with the budgets. Build first isn't about ribbon cuttings, it's about uptime guarantees that trigger penalties when missed. Power redundancy isn't a slide, it's a second feeder line wired before the first factory opens. Water capacity expansions happen ahead of occupancy, so pressure doesn't drop the week the new district moves in. Rail corridors get signal upgrades and rolling stock procurement before announcements about extensions. When a city posts 99.5% transit uptime and pays riders for the 0.5%, that's not marketing. That's enforcement. Movement and shelter get paired by design. Housing abundance isn't a speech about affordability. It's by right density mapped to job centers with clear setbacks, height and parking rules baked into code so planners can approve in days. Build-to-rent shows up with occupancy covenants that punish long vacancies. Short-term rentals are ring-fenced by license volume and unit type, not vibes. Permitting runs on service-level agreements. Miss the 10-day review, the fee auto-refunds, and the app escalates. Builders don't beg. They comply or get denied, with the denial time-stamped and appealable. Services become magnets instead of maybes. Schools sign performance compacts with transparent benchmarks. Reading gains by grade, graduation rates, teacher retention. Fail and leadership changes or models shift without a 3-year drift. Childcare sits near job clusters, financed by linked tools, municipal bonds blended with employer contributions, and outcome payments triggered by utilization and parent employment stability. Hospitals coordinate with transit on shift changes, aligning bus frequency with rounds. Public safety prioritizes predictability over theater. Stable staffing, call triage transparency, and deployments tied to foot traffic and incident patterns, not headlines. Talent doesn't move on faith. It moves on visas and credentials that work on arrival. Hubs file national waivers or pilot programs to fast-lane shortage occupations, nurses, teachers, robotics engineers, welders, and publish processing times. Cross-border credentialing agreements let a teacher start as a teacher, not as a volunteer while paperwork lingers. Universities align departments with local hiring roadmaps, embedding co-ops that start as real work and end as full-time roles. Families land on Friday and have school seat confirmations in their inbox by Monday. Capital arrives when it can predict performance and price risk honestly. Anchor tenants sign with performance clauses that cut the rate if the city misses uptime or permit timelines, and claw back incentives if the company misses headcount or wage floors. Utilities publish volumetric discounts tied to verified off-peak load shifting, not backroom deals. Sovereign and pension funds underwrite infrastructure with step-down coupons when reliability targets are met. Index inclusion gets engineered. Green and social label compliance is audited. Impact data is public, and bond covenants prevent starving maintenance to juice new builds. Procurement stops being theater and becomes a platform. Multi-year frameworks pre-clear vendors for core services, with transparent change order rules and exit ramps if they underperform. Agencies standardize data schemas so mobility, permitting, education, and health dashboards mesh. The city hires for delivery, fewer committees, more product managers, and enough inspectors to hit SLAs. When a contractor misses a milestone, the penalty funds overtime for a second crew rather than a press release. Narrative isn't branding, it's a cadence of measurable promises met in public. Mayors post weekly dashboards with 3 dials everyone cares about: uptime, permit turnaround, and school seat availability. Miss a target, the fix shows up with a date. Communication lowers cortisol, which keeps people planning years ahead instead of weeks. That planning is retention. You can see the inversion at street level. A mid-rise goes up by right along a bus priority corridor that actually prioritizes buses. The first floor houses childcare. The lease is subsidized by an employer consortium. The building's grid-tied batteries shave peak loads, earning residents a credit that covers transit passes. Down the block, a public school posts reading gains. The principal's contract includes a retention bonus for top teachers. Kids cross a safe intersection with signals timed to the bus pulse. Parents aren't calculating contingency routes every morning. They're talking about weekend plans. Now tie it back to the map. Fiber goes in the same trench as water and power, future-proofed with spare conduit. Payment rails get modernized so payroll taxes land in the jurisdiction where work is performed, even if the company is elsewhere. That recapture funds more backbone, which attracts another employer, which fills another school, which justifies another housing tranche. The corridor thickens because every layer, energy, fiber, transit, housing, schools, was sequenced, not improvised. Here's where it gets real. A founder runs a 3-city bake-off. Permit a small lab, enroll a kid, set up payroll, get a clinic appointment, and test a transit commute at 6:30 a.m. One city hits every SLA and sends an apology when a permit arrives on day 9 instead of day 7, with a fee credit already processed. That founder doesn't move for a tax break. She moves because she can trust time. The pull isn't magic, it's the opposite of drift. Guaranteed movement, legalized housing abundance with teeth, services contracted for outcomes, visas and credentials aligned with jobs, capital tied to reliability. A city that treats your minutes like assets earns your years. The endgame architecture, the new map.